Coming at you from the OLR podcast studio.
It's really more of a basement.
Coming to you from the OLR basement studio.
But it's still a podcast.
Coming to you from the podcast basement studio.
Yeah, but you still need to say OLR.
Coming to you from the OLR podcast basement studio.
Oh, that's way too many words.
Coming at you.
That's not enough. You still need to say OLR.
Let's just start. It's OLR. Welcome to the One Lane Road podcast with Lucas and DK. This is Lucas.
Hey guys, I'm DK as usual. If the guys join us tonight for our guests, Lucas Hickman, Dustin Kennedy, One Lane Road podcast out of Middle Tennessee here. We cover sports and music and fitness, everything in between. Got an interesting guest tonight.
Really interesting guest tonight, Vincent T. Hill.
Yeah, he's a former Nashville police officer. That's what draws him to me to him right off the bat. He's a television law enforcement analyst, as his Twitter says here, private investigator, author, and podcast host. He's a really busy guy.
You catch him on Fox and Friends sometimes. He's a correspondent for Fox and Friends and Fox News out of Atlanta, Georgia. And the tie-in with Vincent Hill and us right now is that Vincent is a contributor to a podcast that's ongoing right now. It's a series that I believe Dustin even brought up probably 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Steve McNair, Fall of a Titan.
Yeah, it was either 2 weeks ago or last week, sometime or another on this episode. But it's Sports Illustrated True Crime series, and it's hosted by a guy named Tim Rohan. But in the process of listening to this, he brings up that he was having trouble finding people to contribute when he was given the project, and I think he said spring or summer 2017, so 8 years after Steve McNair's death. He's given this assignment, and nobody's wanting to contribute.
Right.
So he starts doing his research, and of course, anybody that knows this, probably, that's listening, knows, Steve McNair's death on July 4th, 2009 was ruled a murder-suicide by his mistress, 20-year-old Sahel Qasimi. And I never had thought about it as a Titans fan, as a longtime Steve McNair fan. To me, Nashville Police Department opened and closed the case within 4 days.
Well, and
you don't question it a lot.
Well, not only that, the information that was let out in the media led you to believe that it was an open and shut case.
That's right. And so when Tim Rohan started doing his research, he found Vincent Hill's name over all this stuff. So basically, Vincent, a former, like I said, Nashville police officer, had been let go or resigned a couple years prior. He'd resigned from the department, and 2 or 3 years before the case. So they got together, and all this information that Vincent had done on his investigation, very beneficial for Rohan as he's doing this podcast. And I'll tell you what, I'm 2 episodes in, and there's so much stuff that I never heard, never had thought about, never thought it through this way, and it's a big deal here. And I know a lot of people I followed on Twitter, a lot of people are loving it like I am. A lot of people are maybe not agreeing with it. Look.
Anytime that there's something this high profile, there's going to be people that believe the narrative. There's going to be conspiracy theorists that are going to believe something way off in left field, but there's also going to be people that just question it. And I think that's where Vincent falls in. He just questions the validity of what went on, and he has a unique perspective, being a former police officer from the area and a former military member.
When it's a touchy subject. When you talk about here in Tennessee, and you talk about Nashville right down the road, there's not a bigger Titan than Steve McNair.
Right.
Anybody remember when we talked to Mike Keith on here?
Oh yeah.
He said, if you ask Eddie, it's Steve. If you ask Frank, it's Steve. So you're talking about the biggest star in the history of this franchise, of the Tennessee Titans franchise, murdered. And nobody, when you start digging up information on this, nobody wants to know the truth. Steve had girlfriends.
Right.
Obviously, right here. Had a lot of stuff going on. He liked to go out drinking, stuff like that. Not everybody wants to acknowledge their hero.
Right.
Right. And that's just stuff that comes to light when your life is taken the way Steve's was.
Yeah, people start digging.
So what we got coming up is a 1 hour interview with Vincent T. Hill, and Hope you guys enjoy it. He really gets into it. He don't give a lot of spoilers. You need to listen to the podcast. And before we talk to him, like I said, it's Sports Illustrated True Crime, Fall of a Titan. It's on everywhere you can find your podcast. He's written 2 books, Playbook to a Murder and Incomplete Pass. And I hope you guys really enjoy this one.
Hey guys, Lucas here. If you're enjoying the show, please make sure you're subscribed to it on whichever podcasting site you're using. Click like, leave us a rating, and a comment if you have a few minutes to spare. Don't forget you can reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all at OLR Podcast.
All right, tonight we're joined by Vincent Hill. How are you tonight, man?
I'm good, man. How are you?
We are doing good. Glad to have you. For our listeners, just let us know. Let our listeners know a little bit about yourself off the bat here.
Yeah, so crazy old guy named Vincent Hill, former Nashville police officer. Joined the police department in 2006, right out of the Army. And I was on the police department until, I believe, September. I'm sorry, I joined 2002. I was on until September of 2006. So about 4.5 years there as an officer in Nashville, did patrol, did vice. Well, they call it CSU there. I did flex and then back to patrol. So got a chance to see a lot going on in the city of Nashville that a lot of people don't know actually occur.
So you have a little bit of a military background. You come from a military family, is that correct?
Yeah. So, my dad was in the Army for, 30 years. I was born in Heidelberg, Germany, bounced around every 3 years as, most military kids do. I enlisted in the Army in 94, and I was in the Army until 2002. So, my daughter was born in upstate New York, and then my son was born in California. So, that's the Army life.
How did you get out of being a lifetimer after your dad was?
Well, I was actually set to re-enlist in 2001. I was about to reclass to counterintelligence. I just got approved for that. I was about to re-enlist. I had a school date of November 2011 out in Fort Huachuca. And, of course, September 11th happened. And my son at the time was maybe 4 or 5 months old. He was born with a cleft lip and palate, so I knew he was going to have a bunch of surgeries coming up. So re-enlisting for counterintelligence, being assigned to Ramstein, Germany, I knew the chances of being there for those surgeries were slim to none. So talked to my ex-wife about it, and we ended up in Nashville. Her dad was actually on the police department at that time, and he was like, "Hey, we're hiring." So I applied, and the rest, as they say, is history.
All right. When you was in the military, what was your actual job prior to coming out?
Yeah, so I came in. I was unit supply specialist. That's the name of that role. So it's basically logistics. I told myself if I made sergeant within 3 years, I'd re-enlist. I made sergeant in 2.5 years. Re-enlisted one other time, and then right before I got out was going to be my 4th enlistment. So I got out as a sergeant after 8 years and a couple of months.
Well, thank you for your service.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Quite a bit of a change there from Germany and New York to little old Tennessee, I'd imagine.
Not so much. Prior to moving to Nashville to be a police officer, I had gone through there one time. I was on my way to Clarksville, and I stopped on Dickerson Road, and I knew Dickerson Road was like world famous. If you know anything about Nashville, Dickerson Road, it was known for just a few things. And I was like, this is yeah. So it was like, man, this is Dickerson Road. I've seen this on Cops. Like, this is great. I'm on Dickerson Road. So that was my first taste of Nashville, was world famous Dickerson Road.
No prostitutes to speak of, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the Sports Illustrated podcast that's come out by Tim Rohan. It's Fall of a Titan. You can find it all over iTunes and Stitcher and everywhere podcast is brought to you. So we're talking about the murder of Steve McNair in July 2009 by his mistress, Sahel Kasimi. And, of course, you were off the force by then. Do you want to jump in and talk about what intrigued you about that case and what brought up some red flags initially for you?
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, I was already off the department by then, and I remember that day like it was yesterday. I can tell you, I was about to jump in the shower to take my son to a Nashville Sounds game, which we ended up going to that day. And I get a phone call, and I answer, and I'm literally, this may be TMI, standing butt naked. And a friend of mine says, "Hey, Steve was just shot." And I'm like, "Steve who? Like Jackson Johnson? Like Williams? Like who's Steve who?" Like Steve McNair. I'm like, "Yeah, right." So I turn on Channel 5 there in Nashville, and sure enough, breaking news: Steve McNair was found shot inside a condo, 2nd Avenue. So if you remember that day, it wasn't initially that they said there was a female also found with Steve. I think that came out like several minutes later down the line, as this was a fluid situation. So it's like a young female. They didn't say it was his wife, not at his house. So I immediately thought, well, either scorn wife or scorn boyfriend, right? So that was the first thing that kind of tipped me off. And then, of course, by July 8th, they're giving this press conference saying, hey, she bought this gun from this guy that she had never met before at Dave & Buster's, and she had a DUI on that Thursday or Wednesday night / Thursday morning. So she was stressed out about money and she killed herself. And I'm like, wait a minute. She's dating a multimillionaire who had just gotten her Cadillac Escalade. He was taking her to Vegas, Key West, you name it. She's living the life. How is she worried about money? Steve gave her $2,000 that day. Like none of it made sense, right? That would be the equivalent of me saying I'm dating Oprah Winfrey, but I'm worried about money.
Yeah, exactly.
The only thing I'd be worried about is counting how much money I'm getting from Oprah. It wouldn't be that I didn't have money. So it just never made sense. And then you fast forward a couple of weeks, the guy that claims he sold the gun, who also said he didn't know her, he's on our phone records hundreds of times. That day he had texted her like 40 plus times and called, I believe, 13 times. I can verify that. I have her phone records. So, like, well, you lied about where you were. You lied about knowing her. And you're a convicted felon of robbery and murder in the state of Florida. So, who's more apt to do this crime, this young girl or this guy who lied about his alibi? To this day, police don't know where he was. And he was in prison for the exact thing that happened inside that condo.
Well, I didn't realize, I knew that a connection, but I didn't know what all he was on, had charges for. So, this is it's still to this day a big thing here in Tennessee. We're, just about an hour and a half outside of Nashville. And I also remember, hearing it on the radio, going to a 4th of July cookout and just being in shock. And, Steve McNair is he's a living legend here, as a member of the Tennessee Titans, pretty much regarded as the greatest Titan of all time. So it's still, an ongoing, mystery and subject piece here. So this podcast, bringing it back to relevancy, there's just so many unanswered questions, and it's interesting for me to hear you guys talking about it on this podcast weekly.
Yeah, so we actually started working on this podcast, probably over a year ago now.
Right.
Quite frankly, I've forgotten a lot of the stuff I said during the podcast because we've been working on it for so long. But Tim reached out to me. I guess he had gotten an assignment sometime in 2017. Like, hey, go do a story on Steve McNair. And I don't know if you listened to the promo. He thought it would just be this easy. Well, yeah, he was shot 4 times by this girl, and then she killed herself. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And then once he found out my name and started doing some research, reading the books, he was like, well, maybe there's more to the story. And, there's so much that the public was never privy to this day. I think a lot of it will come out in the Sports Illustrated podcast. So it's really important people listen to it. That is just mind-blowing. That would tell you 100% that this was not a murder-suicide. She happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it's unfortunate for her because her name is being dragged through the mud, and her family's name is being dragged through the mud as well.
You know, one of the things that jumps out at me the most is 4 shots from a woman that has no prior record of, you know, she may have been around guns being in Tennessee, but no prior record of anything. What's the chances of somebody that's in an emotional situation that would have had to have been only shooting 4 times with no prior experience? Because, you know, whether it's a single stack or a double stack, most of the time you're going to unload every round in that gun if it's an emotional situation like that. Most people, just statistically, that's never been there, won't stop it. 2 in the head, 2 in the chest.
Yeah. So not only that, let me back up. Now, keep in mind, if you remember, the date of the gun sale actually changed. At first, police said it was Thursday, but when the manager said, oh, it was the day previous that she left, they had to make it fit the narrative of this DUI, so they say, oh, it was Friday. So keep in mind, she supposedly bought this gun at 6 o'clock, and you go from a person who had never held a gun in your life before, because I've talked to her friends, her family, to someone that can shoot someone at each temple and twice in the chest with pinpoint accuracy, not miss one shot to Steve. You're talking recoil, you're talking a round could have jammed, you're talking so many factors where that would be almost impossible. And not only that, Steve McNair's gun was recovered at the crime scene. Now, police will say, oh, it was recovered in his truck. I know that's a lie, because someone that was in the condo that day said, yes, Steve would keep a 9mm Glock in the condo. And guess what's in the property report that was recovered? A 9mm Glock. So if her intent was to kill Steve, A, she wouldn't even involve, because she doesn't know this guy. And then B, she's going to use the gun that she already knows is there. That would make more sense. Or if there were like 8 shots that are just randomly placed throughout the apartment, because she fired the first one and it freaked her out, she fired the second one and it freaked her out, that's more feasible.
Yeah.
But each shot, a kill shot for this little girl, I've been shooting for 20 plus years. I don't think I could bring myself to doing that, even if it was someone I was that mad at.
Right.
What's your opinion on it? Why do you think it was such an open and closed 4-day case? Why do you think there was such a hurry just to hush it up?
Well, I think there's several reasons. A, it was Steve. I mean, if it's me, you, I mean, they may still be working the case right now. I don't know, 10 years later. A, it was Steve, and then B, I know they would have gotten a lot of push from the public, like, what are you doing to solve this case? But where they messed up the biggest, and I know Charles Robinson, I know Lawrence Tarkington, the lead detectives, when they go to house that night, they don't do the research on him. They don't know he's a convicted felon. They don't know he's on her phone records. They just go to his house, talk to him in front of his fiance, which allowed him to make up this cockamamie story that he sold the gun. And they're just like, oh, okay, fine. He sold the gun. That's it. Like, the only person that says there was a gun sale is him.
Right.
And if you do the math, the gun was his up until the day they found it in that crime scene. There's no proof of the gun sale. I've got emails from Opryland Security from way back in 2009 that say there's no such footage of pulling up to that parking lot and her walking out. I've talked to her manager from that night, and she's like, she was at the front counter where you greet people. She was here at 6 o'clock. She was on the phone with Steve at the time she was supposedly buying the gun. And not only that, she was supposed to hang out with a good friend who called her at 9:30 and said she couldn't make it. So up until then, she had no plans of even seeing Steve that night until she texts him at 10:23 and says, hey, do you want to go have drinks? So again, back this up. How do you explain that she purchased this gun at 6 o'clock, to shoot a guy she didn't even plan on seeing until her plans fell through at 9:30 at night? It makes zero sense.
Yeah, that's completely ridiculous. But another thing that just pops out at me is, what's motive? What motive does he have in this?
Well, I don't know if was the fall guy and he knew he'd be the fall guy. My thinking has always been, I mean, it's no secret to hell like to smoke marijuana. I mean, they found marijuana in her system. My thinking has always been he was her lead guy, because I've talked to her friends and they're like, hey, we've never seen this guy before. And you know, girlfriends are thick as thieves. They know who's sleeping with whose boyfriend is this. They know all of this. But I've talked to several of her friends, never seen him before. And when you look at some of the text messages between the two, and even the phone calls, even though had a fiance at home, I mean, there's calls at 1:30 in the morning, 2 in the morning, texts at 2 in the morning. That's usually consistent if you are maybe buying drugs from someone. So, again, back to the Friday, July 3rd, the amount of phone calls and texts between those two were ridiculous. Like, I don't even call my mom 14 times in probably 2 months. There were that many calls, you know, between them two on that day, and like 40-something text messages on that day. So something happened on that day. I believe that maybe she owed money, you know, definitely not for the gun, but for something else. And then it all came to a head on that evening, because he calls her at 12:02, tells police, man, I don't remember all those other phone calls that day. I don't remember calling her that many times. So when police asked him, because I had the audio, when the police asked, well, when you called her at 12:02, how long did you talk? 3 minutes. Guess what it says on the phone bill? 3 minutes. So how can you remember specifically you talked to her for 3 minutes?
But you don't remember all the other calls.
You don't remember all the other calls. You give this alibi that says, oh, I was at my friend's house. Police go talk to the Sunday after they find Steve, and says, no, he wasn't here that night. So, again, the only person to say a gun sale is the only person that's not accounted for during the time of the murders is because his alibi was shattered.
That's a lot to take in. You know, I'm not familiar with all the details as Dustin may be. So that's a lot to take in. Now, something that you say a lot, and I've heard several clips of you saying this, is nothing's routine in police. And in those situations like that, how used are police to getting those situations, and would they have been used to sniffing out, you know, false alibis like that, and why wouldn't they have chased those down?
Well, the explanation I've been given by people that have asked and pressed Nashville police for that is they say, well, the cell phone pings don't put them in the area. But I've looked at all of the documents that are associated with this report. When they subpoenaed the phone records, it was for text messages and calls. So I didn't even see a subpoena that said
location.
And for cell phone location, because that's typically a separate subpoena anyway. So if that is true, two things they could do, if anything, more than to just shut me up. Release this video footage from Dave & Buster's that you would assume Police Basics 101 that you got on that Friday. First, again, it was Thursday, but it didn't fit the narrative, so they changed it to Friday. Release the footage of pulling up to Dave & Buster's, her walking out, getting in his car, driving around the parking lot, like you said, and then her getting out and walking back into Dave & Buster's with his loaded gun. Pull that footage up.
Yeah.
But they can't do it.
Can't
it doesn't
or
exist.
won't. You're right.
Yeah,
Well,
it doesn't exist.
Well, the other side would be is that they won't for some reason. But what reason could they have realistically for not wanting to provide that?
Well, the only reason is quite simply it doesn't exist. Again, I have the email that proves it. You know, because that says that no such footage exists. And, you know, again, even with the cell phone towers, well, release that data that says, oh, it showed them here. But I could easily counter that and say, well, if he was smart enough to tell you he called her at 12:02 and he talked for 3 minutes, he's probably banking on the fact that it would take about that time for a cell phone to bounce off a tower close to his house, and you're assuming he didn't leave from that location. But everybody knows in this day and age, even back in 2009, that cell phone is a walking GPS.
Yeah.
So if I'm trying to set an alibi and I call you and I'm talking right now, boom, 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 it's bouncing off the tower close to my apartment, and then I go out and kill somebody, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to leave my phone. So I can say, no, I was at home. So again, it doesn't, even if they came out with that, it wouldn't prove anything at all.
Now, did they, I'm assuming that they dusted her phone for prints and stuff. Would they have found any prints of his on her phone? That would be something interesting to me, to have somebody else call her phone from his, to set up that alibi. It's a little conspiracy theory, but you know what I mean.
Look, I mean, I've thought about that, but there's no mention of her phone being dusted or Steve's being dusted for prints too. But I thought at one point, just based on some of the text messages in the last hour or so, that maybe someone had her phone and they were sending these text messages out.
Yeah.
So I thought about that. But what's interesting, neither Steve's family or Sahel's family have been given their phones back. They got a lot of property back, but not those phones, because Nashville police say, oh, it's evidence in the case. But you say the case is closed, so why are you holding on to these phones? And a bigger picture, think about this. Now, we've seen Nicole Simpson's crime scene photos, Whitney Houston. We've seen Michael Jackson dead on a freaking bed. But Nashville police are holding on to those crime scene photos higher than Fort Knox.
Huh.
What are they hiding? Why do they not want those out? You can right now, you could FOIA Nicole Brown Simpson crime scene photos. You don't even have to do that now because they're on the internet. But Nashville police, they've been asked so many times, hey, let us see the crime scene photos. Every time, no, we're not releasing those photos. What are they hiding?
This is just so intriguing to me, because I remember as a fan, all those years ago, it was just kind of accepted, okay, it's murder-suicide, and I never really looked into it any farther, and I had heard some inklings, here and there throughout the years, but, getting on this podcast and just bringing into light to me so many things I had never heard or never researched. And you talk about his property, and okay, you talked about the gun being there. What about his wallet and his jewelry and things like that? Were those on him the day of the murder, or had those disappeared?
So yes and no. So Steve was always known to have on a gold Rolex, his ring, a necklace, and another piece of jewelry. None of that was recovered at the crime scene. We know she didn't take it. She was found there at the crime scene.
Right.
Now, Steve, who was worth a lot of money, a lot of, as the youngsters say, a lot of M's, right? A lot of millions. Mm-hmm. Steve had $7 in his wallet. Now, what's interesting, he's a millionaire. She actually had $120-something in her wallet, the same amount that Gillian says she supposedly gave him for the gun, mind you. So the girl that was desperate for money had more money in her purse than this multi-millionaire who had just taken out $4,000 earlier that day. Does that even make sense? That a multi-millionaire would have $7, and that's it on his person.
And he did take out $4,000 that day, you said?
Yes, because keep in mind, even though police say she was worried about financial problems, keep in mind Steve deposited $2,000 into her account that afternoon. That afternoon, he deposited $2,000 in her account. So again, it goes back to, why would she be worried about money? And this wasn't just a one-time thing, like police painted it to be. Oh, she was texting him asking for money, so she was stressed about money. Again, go back and talk to the same people that I talked to, that police talked to, and I have their audio, so I know they told the police the same thing. Like things like, oh, Steve would give her $2,000 or $3,000 a week, like clockwork. So if I'm getting $2,000 or $3,000 a week, what am I worried about? What money am I worried about when I'm getting this for absolutely nothing?
Yeah, that's $100 grand a year if you're getting $2,000 a week.
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
That's wild. Now, in the autopsy, I'm assuming they did an autopsy. And I don't know if they released it or not, but did they check her for gunshot residue? Her hands?
The exact word was it was inconsistent, right? So they say it was a minute trace. But keep in mind, she was found basically in the bra and panties. It's 1:30 in the morning. We know what was about to happen when Steve went over there, right?
Yeah.
This is not someone that was suicidal. It's like, you know what? I'm going to strip down my bra and panties.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to kill him. If the story was true, she would have left work in her Dave & Buster's uniform. She had waited, pacing around the floor. As soon as you walked in, she would have shot him. And she would have been found in her clothes. But bra and panties at 1:30 in the morning, we know what it was.
Oh, yeah.
So,
booty call.
I don't know how much you know about guns, but you know how GSR operates. When you pull that trigger, it's just this big cloud
right over
of
your
gunshot residue.
Yeah.
Right. So it would be on her chest, her stomach, probably her thighs. You know that.
Yeah, especially if she was in a bra and panties. I mean, it's going to be everywhere.
It's going to be everywhere. Exactly. But the official report was a minute trace found on her left hand, which proved she had the gun in both hands. That was the official report.
Okay.
Do you feel like it's convenient?
Yeah, it's laughable.
Yeah, that really is. I mean, that's pretty funny. And it only been on her left hand. And what was it? She 110 pounds. I mean, she's gonna place 4 real nice shots with one hand. Perfect shots with one hand at 110 pounds with a 9mm climb in every time she shot.
Right.
With all that you know, do you think it's convenient for them to keep putting the narrative that she was jealous over other possible mistresses and not, when she was content with getting her money, she's found her bra and panties, but yet he was there to obviously do that, but the narrative keeps changing that she was jealous over other women?
I don't think they'll ever change that narrative. What I can tell you, tune into the Sports Illustrated because we're going to debunk the heck out of that. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
We're going to debunk the heck out of that. But think about this. Think big picture. I've been married twice. I don't know if you're married, but you know how females are, and this is nothing against females at all. But usually, if they're mad at you, you know it. So you need to tell me that this 20-year-old, not
especially 20-year-old,
60-year-old,
yeah.
This 20-year-old was so calm and cool that she hid her anger. She was so angry that she wanted to kill this man, but there was not one text message that gave him any tips, no red flags, nothing like, hey, screw you, or hey, why are you still seeing this chick, or I saw this chick coming out of your apartment. This 20-year-old was able to control her anger and hide it that well? No.
From my history,
not in this lifetime.
Yeah, from my history, that doesn't match up anything I've ever encountered.
Yeah, either that or she was a true sociopath, and then that would have come out sometime earlier in her life, and I would assume her friends would have come up with that too.
Yep.
Man, that's a really crazy story, man, and it really makes me want to dig into this podcast as much as I can here. Now, how did you get into private detective work?
It was one of those things I always wanted to do as a kid. There was cop, and then there was PI. So it was one of those things that I just never really outgrew. And when this case happened, I was, I guess you could say, unofficially investigating it for the greater part of the year. And in 2011, I believe, that's when I actually got my PI license specifically for this. Of course, that's not the only thing I used it for. The cheating spouse and all that stuff. Those are always good to have because
then pay the bills.
They pay
right?
well. Yeah, they pay the bills.
Right.
But the main reason I got it was so I could officially say I'm investigating this case. So when I'm talking to people, it's like, hey, I'm a private investigator investigating the death of Steve McNair and Sahel Kazemi. Would you be willing to talk to me? And you'll be surprised. A lot of people would rather talk to someone that they believe is not law enforcement. So that's where I got a lot of this information.
And you can also request official evidence as a PI working for a family or something too, can't you?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Well, speaking of that, tell our listeners about your relationship with Steve's mother, Lucille, and how you eventually end up gaining her trust, and how you're working with her now.
Yeah, so Lucille, I met maybe a year after Steve was killed. When I wrote Playbook to a Murder, I sent her a copy, and I had a letter in it. And I just first my deepest apologies. I can't remember exactly what the letter said. I still have it somewhere. And just said, hey, I would really like to find out what happened to your son. So I got invited to the ranch because every year they do a celebration of Steve's life on the 4th of July.
Right.
I got invited out. We sat on a porch, and she shared with me what she thought happened. She said, she didn't believe that Jenny or Sahel, whichever way you want to call her, did this. And I just made a promise to her right then, like, I will not stop until I find out what happened to your son. And that was, here we are 8-9 years later. I'm still working on this. But I love Lucille McNair to the depths of the bottom of the earth and back. She's just an amazing woman. She's a strong woman. I mean, considering what she's been through with the loss of Steve, and I actually call her Mama. That's actually how I have her saved in my phone right now. So I love her. Love her to death. Would never have a bad thing to say about Lucille McNair.
Has the whole family been pretty open to you in this process?
Yeah, there's only one person I have never spoke to, and she's not blood family, so we'll leave it at that. I'll let you.
Yeah,
you can probably figure that out.
Yes, sir.
but Steve's brothers, his cousins, nieces, nephews, they took me in like I was one of their own. I'll never forget that as long as I live, because here I am, this huge outsider. They don't know me, but for them to take me in the way they did and they have, man, I feel like I'm a McNair, if you will.
All right. This is kind of getting away from the McNairs. I was just doing a little research on you, and some stuff that I was seeing that I wanted to kind of cover with you was, you're popping up a lot on Fox News, and I think you probably started in Fox News Atlanta, but I think I've seen you on Fox and Friends as well. How did you get to be a correspondent on Fox and Friends, or Fox in general?
Yeah, so it was a long road. Way back in 2014, before that I had done like Dateline and stuff about Steve. But way back in 2014, I have a friend that works at HLN, who's a producer, and I happened to be there one day just hanging out with her. And the law enforcement guy had some type of emergency. I can't remember. I think a tree fell on his house. And it's like 2 minutes before they're supposed to go on air. And they're like, we can't find Mike. Vince, can you cover these stories? I'm like, sure.
Right.
They're like, good, go to makeup real quick and hurry up and come back down. And, the rest is kind of history. I've just kind of been
the onboard correspondent ever since, huh?
Yeah, I just been honing my craft and, getting better and better. And in fact, right before, we went on here, I literally had just walked back in because I was covering the suspicious package incidents across the country, like basically all day. I got a call at like 12:30 from HLN, and they're like, hey, can you come in, talk about this? I'm like, sure. So little did I know I'd be there pretty much all day. But so it was kind of just, grace of God, right place, right time.
Yeah, and a unfortunate event that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. It's as crazy as this sounds, I owe a lot of where I am right now to Steve and Sahel. I know that sounds crazy, but
it is what it is, though, right?
It is what it is. And from the beginning, I've been the only vocal person about this case. Like, hey, this case is bullcrap. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it was never about the TV. It was never about the books. It's like, this is bullcrap. Like, if something happened to me, I'd want somebody to take up this fight for me in my absence. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and really the only thing that sparked the very first book was when I did Dateline, and the very first time, and, you know, I gave Lester Holt this like 2-hour interview of why I didn't believe it was murder-suicide and the whole blah, blah, blah. And I didn't know half the stuff I knew then, but even then it would raise questions. And, you know, they show me for like 30 seconds.
Right.
Like, well, this is an ex-cop, and he doesn't believe she did it. I'm like, that's it? Like, that doesn't tell a story. Like, you can't get people to open their eyes to see what really happened if that's all you're going to show.
Yeah,
So,
they didn't get that sound bit they were looking for, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I always laugh when people say, oh, you're doing this for the money of the book. And little did they know, this is a true story, because I looked it up the other day because it came up. I've literally only made total book sales between Playbook to Murder and Incomplete Past, $866.32.
Rich. Just
$866.32.
rich. All that money from them books.
Yeah. If people think I'm in it for the money, oh man, like, I could probably go find that like collecting cans in one day.
Yeah, they forgot this is the 2000 and nobody hardly reads books anymore. If you didn't put it out on audiobook, you're not getting rich from it.
Exactly.
Yeah. You know, something else I wanted to cover with you is, you know, I see you on there and you're doing mostly the cop things, obviously, and some of the military things, and you do a great job with that. But partisan news is something that I have a big problem with. You know, I'm a Republican, but I still have a big problem with, you know, partisan news either way. Because, you know, it's sort of pop culture news and things nowadays, and unless you get something like these suspicious packages, there's nobody doing nobody doing unbiased news. So
you're absolutely right. And, you know, I'm a Republican too. Like, when I say I'm the black sheep of the family, trust me, I am.
Right.
But you're right. Unless, you know, there's breaking news like a suspicious package, there's really no one else. They're not doing news anymore, right? It's just like.
And as soon as that news cycle ends for those suspicious packages, they're going to be right back to some biased opinion on something. And Maxine Waters is going to have her comment. Yeah.
You know, it's going to be so biased. You're right.
And I think that partisan news has created more of a divide in the United States than there was prior to it happening. You know, and it started prior to Barack Obama, you know, when, you know, it seems like it's when it got worse, and that may have been my age coming through. And, you know, they just attacked Barack Obama so hard that I think it just, you know, swung that pendulum both directions. You know, it swung everybody to polar sides of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, one of the reasons I love doing live TV is because no one could edit what I say, right? Like, when we're live, I'm going to come out, I'm going to say it.
Right.
But the job of a journalist is to give unbiased reporting, but we don't even see that anymore.
Yeah, it used to be their job.
Yeah, exactly. It used to be their job. Like, even for me, like, I anchor for the Law and Crime Network, Dan Abrams' production, the guy that does live PD on A&E. He has his own network.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I anchor for them every week. And there's some cases where it's like, all right, from a law enforcement standpoint, I see it this way. Like, we covered the Jason Van Dyke trial in Chicago, the officer that shot the kid 17 times. You know, and of course, the cop in me wanted to say one thing, but I'm like, well, I'm acting as a journalist, so I have to be right down the middle of the scale here. But nobody's doing that anymore. It's tragic, and you're right. It is causing such a rift in this country.
Yeah, and, you know, in the on the other side of that, I believe that more people, in the younger generations, are getting their news from alternative sources other than like Fox or NBC, CNBC, and MSN and all that. And they're, I don't know that, short of the extremist, there's extremists on either side, and I've said multiple times that that's the problem. Short of the extremist, I believe everybody's in the middle a little bit better than what they used to be too, with being able to get some of that other media.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, the younger generation, they're not glued to the TV like you and I.
They're glued to the phone, right?
It's all on the phone, and you know how Twitter is.
Yeah.
It's like a 30-second video clip, and people like that's the gospel, like because it was on Twitter for 30 seconds. Like, look at the facts. Like even on my podcast, Beyond the Badge, I talk about these police cases, and people are like, "Look at this police brutality," and it's like a 10-second clip. I'm like, well, let's examine what happened before that, what escalated the situation, and what this individual did to cause the officer to react this way.
Right.
Like that's not news. That's just a flash, and you assume it's true. Oh, it was on social media, so it's got to be true.
There is obviously in any group that you would put together, you put 1,000 people in any situation, there's going to be at least one or two people that are bad eggs. And so, like any other situation, there's going to be some cops that are bad eggs, but I believe that, the bulk, and I would go, north of 99%, the bulk of police officers are just trying to do their job, and they're trying to do their job as well as they can.
Well, I would go 99.9, and here's why. I've done that job. When I watch some of these videos and people are like, look at this excessive force. I'm like, no, that's all legal based on the use of force continuum. And here's why it's legal. Because, in fact, there was a case recently in the news where I think a 14-year-old girl was getting punched in the side. And people were like, look at this excessive force. I'm like, no, if you understand the law and the use of force continuum, that's legal because she was actively resisting by refusing to put her hands behind her back. So that's legal. So I always tell people the one thing that will prevent you from getting hurt by the police, one word, compliance.
Yeah.
If you have a grievance, take it up later.
Yeah.
Take it up with your supervisor.
You can beat the charge, but you ain't going to beat the ride.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do not cause yourself to have the officer to force his or her hands to have to use force against you based on your act.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple, really.
It's hard to believe how complicated of a matter that is these days.
Oh, yeah.
Something so simple that gets with social media that just turns something that's nothing into absolute craziness.
Yeah, you know what? I'm so glad that most departments are going to body cams.
Oh,
because,
yeah, for sure.
Like I said, you always see like 15 seconds of the highest point of the police contact.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't see everything that happened before that. And then, of course, people are like, that officer's wrong. He should be fired. It's racism. Like, really? Like, you can't associate race with everything that happens. It's just impossible. And that's not fair to every law enforcement officer out there to just associate race with everything that happens.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Totally unfair.
Yeah, especially to all those good officers, that 99.9% that are just trying to do their job.
Absolutely.
I was watching your YouTube and some of the clips you had on there, and one of the ones that struck me was there was like 3 or 4 officers that walked up to a black Dodge truck, and the guy in the back seat in the right rear come out with a gun, and the headline under it was self-defense ? The officer had fell down, but he just the very first glimpse he got of this guy coming out of his truck, he come out leading with his pistol. I don't even know how
with the pistol.
I don't know how that's even a question. I don't even know why the question mark is there, whether that's self-defense or not, and whether he used the right amount of force. What else are you supposed to do when you're in that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I always say, listen, you meet deadly force with deadly force. You cannot de-escalate deadly force. If someone pulls a gun on you,
And
you're not going to pull out your pepper spray
right.
or your taser, because their intent is to kill you.
Yeah.
And as an officer, your job is to protect and serve.
Mm-hmm.
You got to protect yourself, protect your partner, protect the public. So if that guy gets away with that gun and goes and shoots 15 people, who are they going to come look at? Well, you guys let him go.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't you shoot him? And then I always tell people too, if you are a civilian and you're walking down the street and someone approaches you in a deadly manner and you're armed, you have the legal right to shoot them.
Mm-hmm.
So why is it now a big issue when police, who are trained to protect everybody, have to shoot someone? Why is that an issue? But if it's the average Joe who's just walking down the street using self-defense, it's not a problem. There's something wrong there.
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit about, how do they train you to deal with that pressure? Because that's got to be, well, short of the military service. So, I don't want to discount the military in any way, but, a police officer probably has more interactions than with some criminal than the average military person does.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, in the military, I equate policing and military, of course, they're somewhat similar,
Mm-hmm.
Police is quasi-military. But in the military, you, like, say you're out on a deployment and you see an enemy coming downrange, you key up on the radio, like, I got an enemy downrange, I have permission to fire.
Right.
In policing, you don't have that. You like we were just talking about the truck. That officer couldn't have got on the radio, hey, the guy got out of the truck.
Right.
Do I have permission to shoot him?
Yeah. What's
you
the rules of engagement?
You have literally, right. You literally have split seconds to make those decisions.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is training, right? Train how you fight. Train how you fight. I can't say that enough. Train how you fight. Like when we trained, especially in Nashville, we were training like we were actually fighting, whether it was in the range, whether it was hand-to-hand combat, whether it was grappling on the ground. I mean, we train for real-life stuff. So when it does happen, do you still get excited? Does your adrenaline rush up? Yes. But everything becomes muscle memory. So you don't sit there and freeze up like, oh, God, what do I do? Everything is muscle memory at that point. So train how you fight. That is so important.
Yeah. And you could tell that police officer in that video that I was talking about, you could tell he had been well trained because he went ahead and fell on his back and was drawing his gun while he was falling. So he was creating space in between somebody that was coming towards him and he was engaging at the same time. So you could tell that he was well trained. And, I doubt he had ever been in that situation before, but he went right to it.
Yeah, but it was all muscle memory for him. You're right. He probably had never been in that situation, but it was all muscle memory.
Yeah. Stressful job.
To jump back into the case and into the podcast here, you mentioned your books. Of course, we hadn't give the titles earlier, but like you said, Playbook to a Murder and Incomplete Past. So what I found interesting was for all the people that said you were in it just for the money. One of the stories, now like I said, we were trying not to talk too much about the podcast, but one interesting thing that I found was that the publishing company that offered you money to publish, but they also wanted you to bring in other athletes with affairs such as Tiger Woods, and you stay true to yourself and you declined the offer because it actually had nothing to do with the case.
Yeah, so there was a publishing company in Wisconsin, Titletown Publishing. This was back in 2010, so I can't even remember exactly how I came in contact with them.
Right.
But somehow I'd sent them the manuscript. And I'm like, hey, wrote this book about Steve McNair. So I get on the call with the CEO of the company and her assistant, and they're like, yeah, well, okay, this is a good start, but why don't you incorporate Tiger Woods? And I'm like, I'm sorry, excuse me? And this was right around the time, Tiger was having issues with his wife. And I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, because, he was unfaithful to his wife, and she had mentioned somebody else. I'm like, but that's not what the book is about. The book is about the murder of Steve McNair and Sahel Kazemi in the case and how it was flawed from the start. Well, we know what sells, and you'll sell 300,000 units by Super Bowl if we do everything right. I'm like, I don't really care about that because that's not what this is about. This is about the case. And I said, I'll be more than happy to make some edits here and there where you think the writing could be stronger or something like that. I said, but I'm just not going to do that. And they passed on it. It's funny. The other day I was looking at some of those emails between us, and I was like, wow, I'm so glad to this day I didn't basically sell my soul just for this money, because if that's the case, I would have signed that deal.
Mm-hmm.
I probably would have went out and bought a house cash, and just, and I wouldn't have cared what Lucille McNair thought about me, Steve's brothers, to Hill's family. I wouldn't have cared anything about that. I would have just said, yep, let me go ahead and sign this and sell all these books.
Yeah.
And go on this world tour. But no.
Well, there's a podcast I listen to called Meat Eater by Steve McNair, and he always says that things that are fun at the time are cheap because they're not fun in the long run. But anything that you can look back on later in life and talk about, that's the stuff that's worth doing. And I think you definitely went the right route. Because you obviously it's something that you've spent a lot of time on, and eventually, you'll know that you didn't sell out at that point, and you'll know that you did a good job.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. I mean, to me, I made a promise to two women, Lucille and Azadeh, who's Sahel's sister, that I would find out what happened to each of their family members. And that's what it's all about. Like, I could write 20 books until I'm blue in the face. It's not going to change anything until we get police to reopen this case. So I'm still working behind the scenes trying to do that. A lot of people don't realize that I'm still working behind the scenes, gathering evidence, talking to people to try to get that done. So,
well, what do you need? What is it going to take for them to release this? I mean, is if the community got behind you and signed a petition or anything like that, is that what you need? Or, what is it that would push this along any farther for you?
Yeah, I definitely think a petition would definitely help. Just enough people saying, hey, we've always had questions about this case. You owe us answers. Like the number one answer that is owed to everyone is, where was during the time of the murders? He gave them an exact 2.5 hour window, which is the exact time that murders happened, between that 12:02 call and where he said he was. So that's the number one question. Where was he at? And if you can't account for him, then he should have been charged from day one with these murders. Again, I go back to that day when they talked to him on that Sunday, where he's like, oh, I just met the girl one time, blah, blah, blah. She asked me to buy a gun, so I just sold it to her because I was hard up for money. Well, first of all, $100 even in 2009 is not a lot of money.
Right.
Yeah.
But secondly, when they talked to him in front of his fiance, they gave him the opportunity to lie. What they should have done, take him down to the police station, put him in that room that's video recorded and audio recorded, leave the room, let him get that little funny feeling between his legs that he almost has to use the bathroom, and then come back in and say, we have physical evidence tying you to 2 murders. Start talking. And when you use the term physical evidence, that doesn't necessarily mean DNA, fingerprints, hair fibers. Physical evidence could be a gun, too. So all they had to do was say, we have physical evidence tying you to these 2 murders. Start talking. And I guarantee the investigation would have gone an entirely different way. But that's not how they worked it.
They would have done that to anybody else, though. I mean, that's standard protocol for any other situation.
Exactly. They would have done it. That's police 101.
Yeah.
Is this kind of backwards, though? Because you would think with a celebrity the stature of Steve, especially in the city of Nashville, what are they covering up? You think they would go to all measures for a guy that means so much to the city of Nashville and to the state of Tennessee as a whole? You think they would go to more extremes to find out the truth, wouldn't you think?
You would think, but again, it depends on how big the cover-up is. And you'll have to listen to Sports Illustrated to get a little bit of that, but it depends how big the cover-up is and who else may have been involved in it.
All right, well, Vincent, hey, you've been a great guest, and like I said, I don't want to keep asking too much because I know we've got it coming up in the next 7 episodes. Really intriguing stuff. I'm loving it. what you've given here to us and to what you've given to Tim on the podcast. Anything else you'd like to throw in before we let you go tonight?
No, I think we're good, but we should definitely reconvene after Sports Illustrated.
Oh yeah,
aired all their episodes, and trust me, like I always tell people, I've forgotten more about this case than the average person will ever even knew.
Oh my! The last 2 to 3 minutes of episode 1, that threw me for a loop. We're talking about what was on the crime scene. I had never heard that before, and that just jaw dropping. In episode 1, you know what I'm talking about. So
yeah, absolutely. So I had heard that several times. Like I heard it in 2010, didn't lend any credence to it. Then I heard it a year later from someone totally different. Still was just like, no, not really. And then when I get this call last June from a retired Nashville police officer, and he, starts asking about Steve's injuries, I'm like, well, it was to the chest, one at each temple. He said, was there anything else? And I said, well, I heard a rumor a long time ago. He's like, was it this? I said, that's exactly what it was. So, in fact, just recently, I talked to someone who independently knew Jenny, and they had heard the same thing, and they say that their source was a police officer. So
that's unbelievable.
So that goes back to what I said. Depends on how big the cover-up is.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, everybody. You can listen to this story that we're talking about on Steve McNair, Fall of a Titan. It's a podcast. You can find it on iTunes. You can find it on Stitcher. You can find it wherever you can get your podcast. You can hear more from Vincent at Beyond the Badge podcast, which is your podcast. And then, I'm sorry, the name of the show that you're hosting escapes me. I'm sorry.
So it's Law and Crime, the Law and Crime Network.
Yeah. And go ahead and plug your Twitter and Instagram or wherever your social media is at so people can follow you.
Yeah, so to keep it simple, all my social media is the same. Vincent Hill TV, so on Twitter, Instagram, at Vincent Hill TV. I believe my Facebook is the same as well. So my website, VincentHillTV.com. I just like to keep it really simple because I'd probably forget all that other stuff.
Right. Makes it easy to flow around. All right, man.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Really interesting. Look forward to the update after the end of this podcast.
Oh,
series.
Yeah. I can't wait.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we appreciate you. We'll be talking to you soon.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, man.
Man, good interview. Very interesting guy. Brings to light a lot of I would call them facts about the case. And just the question that he's asking is good police work, is what it sounds like to me.
Absolutely. And to me, I mean, these are things I haven't thought about because, like I was saying before the podcast, before the interview, I haven't thought about it.
Right.
And when you listen to these first 2 episodes, and I'm telling you, I strongly suggest anybody, for one, if you're a Titans fan, if you're a Steve McNair fan, if you want to know more about this subject, but also if you're into, I'm not going to say conspiracy theories or crime, but I mean, this is real life stuff, and Vincent has done his due diligence.
Oh yeah,
more than anybody.
And and the term conspiracy theory gets a bad rap because of conspiracy theorists, but sometimes there really is a conspiracy to hide things, and
yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff he's saying doesn't make sense. So it's not the derogatory term conspiracy theory. It's the conspiracy theory in the truest sense of the word, that there's most likely something else that happened that was either covered up intentionally or covered up for some other reason.
He just brings up so many good facts that, like I said, I had not thought about previous to this, and I mean, he's worked on this case for how many years now?
Right.
And what's he got to gain because he published his own 2 books?
Made $856 on them.
And he's doing this, I mean, a little bit, I'm not going to say for himself, but when you've put that much work into a case that there's something going on, and he's promised Steve's mother that he's going to come to find out an answer for her and, for the family and for Sahel Qassemi's family. To me, there's something to it. I don't know. And like I mentioned on the podcast, it's Steve McNair. one of the biggest names in the history of Nashville.
Yeah.
And you would think that this would have been talked about more, and they would want to get to the
Yeah.
bottom of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm very, very interested, guys. If this is up your alley, and you're a Steve McNair fan, and you're a Titans fan, and you're a fan of crime stuff, you
Yeah.
got to go download this Sports Illustrated True Crime: Fall of a Titan. I know you're gonna go download it right now.
I was literally about to say that I found my new podcast because I haven't listened to any of it yet. But sitting here talking to Vincent, obviously, I've got my new riding tunes for this week.
Yeah, and Playbook to a Murder and Incomplete Pass. And once again, I'm gonna plug his books.
Yeah. Beyond the Badge is his podcast. Make sure you go out and check that out. This isn't the only thing that he does. He does a lot of other stuff. In the Beyond the Badge, he's going out and looking at a lot of law enforcement videos. And if you follow Fox News, you follow MSNBC or CNBC, there's always two sides to every story, but the way he looks at them is through the eyes of a police officer, or at least tries to do his best to do that. And I think he does a great job at it. Obviously, he's on Fox and Friends quite a bit, and so he would be playing to my demographic. So, I may be a little biased in that, but I think he does a fantastic job of not being partisan when he's looking at those. And,
Yeah.
And so go out and check out Beyond the Badge. His podcast, very good. Law and Crime Network, he's a host on there. Check that out if you can.
And for those of you joining us just for the Vincent Hill interview, I hope you enjoyed us. And we don't get into a lot of this generally on the show, but go back and check our archives out. I think there's a little something for everybody on there.
And if you're just here because of the name Steve McNair, go back and check out some of our other Titans interviews. We've had some Titans on here too.
Yep, Keith Bullock, Kevin Dyson, Mike Keith, Jim White. Plenty of Titan stuff in the archives there. And that's a One Lane Road podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube. We're everywhere.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening.